So say you've built your model and it's kind of complicated, but you've used the visualization tools to try to find patterns, and you've used the trace tool to help you think about causes and effects. And you've looked at the cut sets to help you think about what are some opportunities for introducing robustness or resilience to the system. But sooner or later, somebody, your constituents, your boss, somebody is going to say, well, what are the specific policy actions that we can take in order to achieve our policy objectives? And the tool that the Elephant Builder provides to help you think about specific policies is this solve solve tool. Now, the Elephant Builder doesn't actually know things about your organization or your community. It doesn't know what you're trying to do or what means you have for getting there. So it asks you for some more information. Specifically, it asks you to place all of the nodes, well, not all of the nodes, but it asks you to place the nodes into one of these three categories. The driver variables are the environmental variables that you cannot really control, but that you're concerned about. So this is where your climate change variables are going to go. The lever variables are the nodes that you have some direct influence over. It doesn't mean that you have complete control over them, but it does mean that you have some direct influence on them. So your community probably does not have direct control over crime. That'd be cool if it did, but more likely your community has direct control over law enforcement. Or even better, if this node had said law enforcement budget or law enforcement oversight. And finally, the goal variables are the nodes that, at least for the purposes of this particular analysis, that your department, your community, your organization is trying to change for the better or for the worse, or not for the worse, but for the bigger or the smaller. One more thing is, if there is a node or a set of nodes that you actually want to remove from analysis, temporarily remove them from the system, then you can do that pretty easily right here by just unchecking it. And so when it's crossed out, it just means that the Elephant Builder is going to ignore the existence of this node for this analysis. All right, so I'm going to place these nodes into these categories. And you don't have to put all of the nodes into a category. In fact, most of them I'm going to leave uncategorized. But I'm going to put many of them into the categories, and it's going to take a while, so I'm going to speed it up. All right. So what I have here is a subset of the complete model. And this subset is made up of the drivers, the levers, the targets, and all of the nodes that sit on causal paths that join the drivers and the levers to the targets. If I want to look at just the paths that are downstream of a particular driver or lever, I can just click on it, and it'll isolate out just those paths. And here's what's cooler is if I want to see what happens if one of these changes in a particular direction. So if Eastern Sierra snowpack goes down, then it'll show me what goes down and what goes up. Property damage goes up, emergency services go down. And the way that I'm doing that is I'm using the right click. So workforce availability. If I right click on it, if workforce availability goes up, then rail system reliability goes up, accessibility goes up, property damage goes down, crime goes down, and so on. And this is all according to the directions that were entered by the builders when they built the original model, when they added nodes and connections in the original model. If I want a different view of those paths, I can click gasoline supply, and it'll give me a list of all the causal paths that are downstream of gasoline supply, at least the ones that connect gasoline supply to any of the policy targets. And if I hover over one of these paths, then it'll just show me that list here in the diagram. If I click on this eye icon, this thing that's a circle with an eyelid or eyebrow over it, then it'll isolate that path and sort of give me this nice close-up of it. And I can even save it to a report. The report is just a place that will save all the paths that I'm interested in so that I can look at them in isolation later on. If I want to think about this coming from the direction of the targets rather than from the direction of the levers, then I can do that. Let's say I want to minimize injury and death. Then here in the diagram, it shows me what levers do I have to make go up or go down, in this case they're all up, in order to minimize injury and death, and it also lists them here. So it says to maximize backup generator availability, maximize workforce availability. Now, when I take an action, there's always the potential for some sort of causal feedback loop to intervene between the policy and the target. A positive feedback loop, a reinforcing loop, can amplify the impact of my policies, maybe make them run out of control even. A negative feedback loop or a balancing loop can dampen or nullify the impact of my policies. So it's always useful to have the causal feedback loops in mind. And the nice thing is that the Elephant Builder can help me identify these loops. So if I'm minimizing injury and death, then I might want to think about this causal feedback loop, where workforce availability impacts electricity reliability, which impacts, let's say, rail system reliability. And these three might act to amplify the impact of my policy. And I can also save this to a report. So here's that report so far. It has that path that I saved, and it has this loop that I saved. And this report thing is useful because there are a lot of loops listed. And many of them are not actually going to be relevant to my policy. And so it's a useful exercise for you and maybe the group of builders to go through many of these loops to see, well, are there any here that we should be concerned about? And if there are, you can save them to that report so that you can just think of them more carefully later on. Now, it would be really nice if the Elephant Builder could give us some indication of which policies are likely to be more important. But importance is this really subjective human concept that's very difficult for us to put into the Elephant Builder. At Bellwether Collaboratory, we're still thinking about the best ways of prioritizing the policies. But for now, as a first pass, we're having the Elephant Builder list which lever variables are involved in the most causal paths. In this case, workforce availability is in 409 paths, and which levers are implicated in changing the most different downstream targets. So here, backup generator availability affects 6 downstream targets, whereas ADA enforcement impacts only 1. Now, this is not to say that backup generator availability is definitively more important than ADA enforcement, because there are all sorts of ethical factors that have to be considered, all sorts of human considerations that the Elephant Builder is not capable of. But it is a way of thinking about the breadth of impacts, and we think that's a start toward thinking about the of priorities for policies.